In all my years, all my ACDC years, I have not mastered layers. So layers are maybe the more complicated part of ACDC, and I'll explain maybe the background for that first, which is a fairly simple thing to understand. So in ACDC, the thing we started to develop before we developed a layer editor was our develop mode. And so people are familiar with our develop mode in a pretty simple context. And what that is it provides them a mode to change effects on an image, like lighting, for example. And these effects can either be applied universally to your image using like general tools, which you see on the left here. And then they can be applied selectively using things like the brush, the gradient, and then the radial gradient tool. Now, the limitation of develop mode has always been that it cannot create a composite image. To me, what a composite image is, it's when you take two individual images and then you combine them together, choosing like elements you like from one image and elements you like from another image, and just sort of deciding to put those two elements together. And a classic example, one that I mention routinely, is an example where you have a sky you like in one image and a foreground you like in another image. And in your first image, the one with the nice foreground, the sky is suboptimal. And instead of like creating lighting adjustments in something like develop mode, what you do is essentially you erase the sky in edit mode and begin the process of actually creating a new sky using another image. Can everyone hear me okay? I might turn up my volume slightly if it's coming in low. Anyway, but that's sort of that's the sort of the gist of the understanding here. Okay, it seems like my audio is fine. In regards to composite images, does that make sense to everyone? In the sense that we would choose one element from one image and we would want to combine it with a sort of a nice foreground, or maybe like, a subject that we like with a background we like in another image. Okay, so that's a good platform to start with from an understanding of. And that's something that we can showcase how to do. And a good example, like I said, is just a sky replacement, because it's a simple one and done kind of composite image. You're taking one element, you're taking another element, you're combining the two, that's it. It's a really good beginner's example, and also one that people want. They want to do that regularly. Let's go back and let's begin the process of starting a description of layers. So what I'm going to do is and you can do this too if you want to follow along. It's kind of fun. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new image. I'm going to go to new. I'm going to go to image. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a image that is, like 2000 pixels by 2000 pixels. And I'm going to use a transparency background, which is traditional for this. And I'm going to click OK. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring this into edit mode. And we're going to talk about this in edit mode. And we're going to get a really fundamental understanding for layers. And this is going to be the ground, the sort of the, what's the word for it? The sort of fundamental understanding, so we can use this moving forward, so we can talk about things like opacity and blending, which utilize the same theory. So what I'm going to do is I have this blank canvas right here. And in ACDC and in many other, that's where I was looking for. Thank you, John. Foundation. How transparency is interpreted in ACDC is it's provided through this checkerboard pattern, right? This sort of indicates to us that this image contains no pixel information. Okay, so it contains no content currently. So, so checkerboard, I guess chessboard maybe is close. Yeah, chessboard is equals no pixel content. So it has no visual information. So this is, if we were to save this image, which we wouldn't, but if we were to save this image as a PNG, which contains transparency, this image would not contain anything. It would just be an invisible image, if that makes any sense. It's still a file, but it doesn't contain any information. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill this layer with a color. Let's fill this layer with red. I'm going to take the fill tool here, and what we're going to do is we're going to fill it with a red color. So I'm going to take red from the RGB spectrum here, click OK, and I'm going to fill this. So I took my layer, which was blank in this case, okay, and I filled it using the paint bucket and using something called the foreground color picker. So there's nothing beneath this layer and there's nothing above this layer. In ACDSee, layer order matters. So what that means is that the layer is located on the top, okay? The layer that is on the top of your layer order is the one that is visually prioritized to you and displayed first, barring some form of opacity, blending, or masking changes. So the takeaway from this should be that the layer that you see that is on the very top of your layer order is the one that you're going to see first. And the way that we can illustrate this, I think quite succinctly, is we're going to take our layer 2 and we're going to fill it with a different color. Let's fill it with let's go to the fill tool, click the foreground color, and we'll click blue, and we're going to fill this layer with blue. So what you should see now is you should see a layer, your layer 2 here and your layer 1. One contains blue and the other contains red. Let's just go about renaming these quickly so this makes sense to everybody. So we have blue and then we have red. So first and foremost, takeaway should be that we can't see the red layer currently because the red layer is located underneath the blue layer. Does that make sense to everyone so far? I got a sure, I got some yeses. So layers are not static, meaning they can be moved. So if I take my blue layer and I pull it underneath my red layer, what you'll see is the red layer is now visualized, it's presented to us, it is displayed, everyone can see that. I can do the same thing, I can pull my blue layer up to above my red layer, and so forth. I can mix and around, move these guys as much as I want. And I'm going to see that that is what is displayed to me. So that layer order matters. There's another couple things that matter in this mode and how they interact with layers as well. So right now we have both of our layers visually turned on in the sense that they are they're unhidden. So there's this little eye icon here that exists to the left of every layer. Okay, so that doesn't just include like static layers or image layers. That also can contain things like adjustment layers. For example, I just added this vibrancy just to show you what I mean by clicking on the vibrance adjustment layer. And you can see that it too has a little eye icon that appears to the left. That's a good question, Trevor. I think that's coming from the green or the blue, actually. Yeah, blue has 20. This blue has 255 blue, 20 green, and 0 red. Actually, red might as well. I don't think these are true hues. Yeah, they both have a bit of green. So that's why you're seeing that. What Trevor was asking was why were we seeing this green pitch in the histogram right now? And that's why. Okay, Peter asked a question, and then we'll continue on talking about the hide icon. So Peter asked, does it matter that they were also, by the way, please ask your questions in the Q&A panel for the future. Thank you. Does it matter that they were created as layer 1 and layer 2, now renamed? Is it important to remember that one layer was created first? No, it isn't. This only matters, Peter. So how this is going to matter in the future is when you have opened up an image rather than a blank image like we've created here. When you open up an image, the naming of the layer or the origin of the layer really only matters if you plan on making destructive changes to the image. If you're making non-destructive changes to the image, like using adjustment layers and masking, then knowing that that image was your sort of starting image or your original image doesn't really matter. It's only when you're using an image that you plan on making some destructive changes in edit mode that you'd want to make like a duplication of your layer, and maybe one you'd write on original and the other you would write on like the image you're planning on editing. That's beyond the scope of this workshop, but hopefully that gives you a bit of understanding on why you would want to maybe make a duplicate. And then one more question before we continue. Mark asked, how do you add the histogram to this view? All things that you want to add view-wise can be added in panes up at the very top. And you will see that histogram is currently added to my user interface. And it's also key is F7. So you can add it that way. But panes contains the information that you can add there. Okay, so let's continue talking about this mode. And again, just if you have any questions, just fire them in Q&A and I'll get, if they pertain to what I'm talking about at the time, I'll get to them. Otherwise, I should be able to get to them at the end. So hide is a way to visually sort of halt seeing this part of the information. So if I was to click on the hide icon, and what you're going to see here is that this hide icon comes with, it's now sort of displayed in gray, which means it's turned off. And there's a line through the eye icon, which means we can't see it. It's still presented in our layer order. So this is not akin to deleting our layer, and deleting our layer would get rid of this red layer altogether. What this does is it just visually doesn't present this layer. So you can unhide it by clicking on that little eye icon, and that will hide or unhide that layer respectively. So it's just something to keep in mind. So here we have our red layer and our blue layer, and our red layer is prioritized because it is the one that is located on top. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide my blue layer for now. Actually, you know what? Just for the purpose of this conversation, let's delete this layer, because I think this would make more sense if we deleted it. So let's introduce masking now, and then we're going to talk about how masking incorporates with those red and blue layers. Masking is a way to take a part of your image and showcase that to how would be a good way of essentially draw on or to allow specific parts of your image to come through. And this is useful for when we do compositions. And the reason why is because we need to see that information in one area of our image, and we need to omit or hide information in another area of our image. So when we interact with a layer, we're painting on a layer. And what I mean by that is if I go to this brush tool here, and I just use this brush tool by clicking here, you'll see that my image layer here on the left, indicated by this thumbnail, has the number 9 written on it. And what I want to say right now is this is sort of relevant to Peter's question from earlier. This is a destructive change that's been made to this layer. So this is not masking, but this is drawing on a layer. And the reason why this is relevant, because if we were to add a mask to this layer, so if I click on this red layer here, and I click on something called Add Layer Mask, then this mask provides this little white thumbnail that appears to the right of my image. And this white thumbnail we can paint on with the brush. And this white thumbnail interacts very differently than painting on the layer itself. So when we paint on the layer itself, it adds a visual representation of whatever we painted on, in this case, the number 9 that I did earlier. When we paint on this white mask thumbnail, that number 9, you will see that a different interaction occurs. Instead of I'm getting a black number 9, what you're seeing here is a mask that is showcasing to me a transparency now. And we know this is a transparency because we can see the checkerboard that's underneath of it. So what is going on? Okay, so now we need to begin the process of having a conversation about masks. So the mask is what you see on the right here. The mask is this white box. This white box is really just telling us one thing, okay? What it's telling us is that that all of the information in our image from top to bottom, every single pixel of this 2000 by 2000 square image here is presented to us. It's turned on. We're seeing it. If this mask was the inverse color, okay, masks are by nature bimodal, meaning that they are either black or white. There's exceptions to this rule, but for the purpose of this workshop, they're either black or white. If I make this mask the other color, if I turn it to a black mask, and I can do that by clicking on this invert button right here, then it's telling us the opposite information. It's telling us that every pixel, this 2000 by 2000 square image, every pixel in my image is now turned off, which is akin to this layer being empty. So the takeaway from this is when we're masking our image, when we have this mask added to our image, this gives us the ability to showcase, to turn on, or to turn off parts or all of our image. And this is fundamental, so fundamental for making image compositions. So black is turned off and white is turned on. We can see white, we cannot see black. So before I move on, I just want to ask a simple question is, does this make sense? Does black turning our image off as a mask make sense? Does white turning our image on make sense? If there's any questions in regards to this, this is a good time to ask. Hopefully this makes sense so far. If there is any questions, we'll come back to them, but let's move on. So we just have one layer currently. And when we have one layer, when we turn this layer off by making it black, right? We don't see anything else. And the reason why we don't see anything else is because there's nothing else in our layer order. There's only one layer in our layer order. So when you're seeing this, you're probably going, okay, Adam, I think I'm understanding. So black is off and white is on. I get it. But we're not seeing anything. And the reason why is because we only have one thing in our layer order. There's nothing underneath of this to showcase, right? So so let's go through the process of filling this this little mask here, this little guy. We're going to showcase how to get that outcome in different ways. So to turn it either black or white. So there's several ways of filling a mask, okay? And let's talk about them. So the first one I showcased was by default, when you add a mask, it's turned on, it's a white mask, okay? You can click on this little invert button here, which will invert the mask, right? Turns it to the opposite color. You can right click on the mask itself and note that there are some mask settings right here. So if I want to set the mask white, barring whatever is contained within this currently, I can set it as white. I can set it as black. I can delete this mask, so I can remove the mask. I can invert the mask. So if it's black, it'll be turned white, or the parts of it that are black will be turned white, and the parts of it that are black, that will be turned black. Yeah, exactly. Black conceals, white reveals. The other thing we can do is we can disable the mask. And what this does is it just turns the mask off, which will be more relevant in the future, but we'll showcase that in a bit. The other thing we can do is we can take the bucket tool, the fill bucket. And earlier when I was saying that when you fill the layer, okay, so if I fill the layer, it's going to turn black, right? But if I fill the mask with black, it's going to turn off. So these are very different functions, right? And we got to keep that in mind when we're interacting with masks versus images. So the image is red in this case, right? And that's when I said when we draw on the letter 9, right? Oops, that's bad. If we draw on the letter 9, that's a destructive change that's now impacting just this red layer, right? But so when we actually draw black on a white mask, that gives us the ability to actually conceal parts of our image and hide other parts of our image. So the takeaway from this should be that there's a couple ways to change a mask from black to white or from white to black. And that's by using the fill bucket tool, by using the brush, or by like right clicking on the mask and selecting what you want to do with the mask, either invert it or set it at a specific color. Okay. So let's add another layer to this and we'll talk about that. So let's do what we did last time. I'm just going to add another blank layer. And the way I do that is by clicking on this little plus icon down in the bottom right-hand corner. And when I add another layer to this, what it's going to do is it's going to create this little transparency here, and that adds a layer 1, which what we're going to do is we're going to fill it with blue. So now we get some examples of what's going on here. And I'll rename this again, and I'll call it blue. And then we can sort of have a look at this. So when we have our red layer turned on, we're seeing red. What's going to happen? Okay, we'll play a little game. This might seem silly and dumb, but if we were to turn this mask black, if we were to, as William said, conceal this, what would we see? What would be the result that we would see in this preview window here if I was to turn this black? Yeah, totally. Eric, yeah, you guys got it. So this is important because when I conceal a layer, what's going to be presented to us is the next thing in the layer order, right? It's the thing that exists right after that. Greg asked a question, and again, just a reminder to ask questions in the Q&A panel. How does it determine the size of the layer when it is created? The size of the layer is in correspondence to the original document size. So if you have opened up an image, say of a mountainside that you took when you were in BC, and the image was 3,000 pixels wide by 1,500 pixels tall, that is the original image size. So all other layers are going to be created in that size, unless you change that. The same is true for blank layers. When I go to add a new layer, it's creating another 2000 by 2000 pixel image. And the reason why is because when I created this starting image to begin with, I created it at that size. Owen asked, can the mask end up on the left side of the color red? If so, does it change anything differently? It cannot, and it doesn't. Good question. Okay, so when we hid this mask, what we see here is the layer that exists beneath of it. So this is kind of cool too, because what this gives us the ability to do, and now hopefully now you should be seeing the importance of this, right? If I hide this red layer using the mask here and black, what you can see is I can actually sort of combine these layers in interesting ways here, right? So when I paint on in a specific way over a mask, you can see that I have hidden a portion of my red up at the top here, right? Here's my example of a mountain. So now what we're seeing is a foreground of red and a background of blue, right? So if we were to apply this same methodology to another image, right? So an image of a mountainscape, if we were to start the process of blurring the part of our image using this mask, or not blurring, that's the wrong word, but concealing the top part of our image, you can see that we can get rid of a sky. And then we can have underneath of it a secondary layer, right? And that secondary layer can be a new sky. It can be from a completely different image. So you generally don't. So Peter asked a question, why would you want to make destructive changes on a layer? So again, this was somewhat outside of the scope of this workshop, but I will answer it. Develop mode is a non-destructive workspace. Edit mode is, by its nature, a non-destructive workspace that has the ability to make destructive changes to images. So, and the way that I'd like to sort of describe this is that all of these adjustments that we make on this right-hand panel here using layers, masking, adjustment layers, that sort of thing, these are all non-destructive changes in the sense that we can come back to these changes provided we save this file as an ACDSee file. That ACDSee file is what enables non-destructiveness. So just in this pictures folder, I'm just going to do, we'll just call this layer example. I'm going to save this. Actually, let's call this something else. Oh no, that's fine actually. I'll save it as an ACDSee file. And the difference here is what this is going to do is if I was to open up this image in the future, so if I was to navigate away from this image to work on something else, or if I was to have closed ACDSee and come back into this image, I can still edit this layer. And the way that we know this is because this layer has not been flattened. Okay, so when I see this layer panel on the right here, I see my red here. Well, I can take this red mask, okay, this mask that I created previously, and instead of painting on black, I can actually paint on red, and I can get my mask to be concealed. Sorry, and so all of the red portion of my image is now unhidden, right? It's presented to us. So these layers, these masks, and these adjustment layers are non-destructive. When we talk about destructiveness in edit mode, that's when we're interacting with this info palette that exists on the left. So what I mean by that is if you were to make changes using these filters on the left, what we should be doing is we should be noting that these are going to be destructive changes. And how could I illustrate this to you now? Let's take this blue layer, okay, and let's bring it into something like color EQ. Let's change the color of this blue layer. So let's change the hue to yellow and go done. What you're going to see is that this blue layer has been permanently changed to yellow. If I was going to save this file as an ACDSee file and then re-navigate into this layer, let's hide this. Right? I move away, come back into edit mode. This blue, I can't interact with this blue. I mean, I can make another destructive change to change it back into a blue, but I have not the ability to adjust that setting that I've created. And so this is where we enter the realm of destructiveness, right? And this doesn't make a lot of sense, or sorry, this does make a little bit of sense for simple changes like this, right? Because it's just such a simple adjustment. It's I have just changed blue to yellow. No big deal, right? I can change this back in a second. And so it's non-destructiveness, or sorry, it's destructiveness doesn't necessarily matter. But when we're interacting with huge images with complex color and lighting and all this stuff is going on, and I make a destructive change, well, that might take me hours to fix. In this case, all I can do, I could just use the paint bucket tool and just refill with blue. But that's the destructiveness there. Okay, that's well beyond the scope of this workshop. So we're going to stop there and we're going to continue the conversation. We're talking about masking here. So we have this red layer here, and we were talking about using the brush tool. So when we're interacting with the brush tool on a mask, we are adjusting what we see. So this was a question from earlier. I took the brush tool, the same brush tool that I can use to make a destructive color adjustment to the actual red layer. But when interacting with the mask, that's when I see this pattern emerge where my blue layer is the one that is being displayed to me here. So I'm painting on white on this mask, and I'm seeing the layer emerge beneath it, right? So or rather, this is sort of the other way around in the sense that the black part of my image, the part that's turned off in the red layer, is surrounding the blue here. And when I paint on white, I'm actually getting that red to come through. So I'm presenting that red. And so this is actually a cool example too, because now I have this little circle in the center here. What's going to happen if I make an inversion of this mask? So I have sort of red displayed here and blue displayed around it. When I click invert, what's going to happen? How is this going to change? In what way, Randy? What am I going to get presented to me? Yeah, Larissa has it. Nice. Randy has it. Yeah, and Dela, opposite colors. So they're, yeah, exactly. So when I click invert, it's going to invert the mask. So the mask, as we can see here, the mask thumbnail, white is being presented to us. So this red layer, it becomes white. And then the layer beneath it, that black layer, is now being presented as hidden to us. So So Dean asked an interesting question, and this one is, let's talk about it. I'm gonna fill this mask with white. Dean says, what happens if you painted yellow instead of black? So masks are like I said, they have a sort of, they only have they have a bimodal element to them. They're either black or white, right? So if I was to click, and I'm still interacting with the mask, okay? We're not talking about the layer. When if I painted yellow, it's just we're gonna see yellow. But if we're talking about the mask, right? If I click on the foreground color picker, Dean, I want you to watch what happens here, okay? Because masks are gonna treat this always like this, like as if it's either black or white, right? So if I click on yellow, okay, watch what happens to my color picker right here, okay? I'm gonna hit okay. And what you see is a gray square appear because this yellow in this case is representing a intermediary between black and white. And so when we paint on using this yellow brush, right, what you can see is exactly what you'd expect in an intermediary between red and blue, purple, right? Which brings us really succinctly to my next point, okay? Let's talk about opacity. So far we've been talking about like these bimodal adjustments for these masked layers. So I have this red layer, I have this blue layer. When the mask is black, I'm seeing the layer beneath it. And so when the mask is white, I'm seeing the principal layer. I'm seeing whatever contained within the first layer. When we change this opacity, right, to 50% on our first layer, what we're going to see is how these pixels interact, right? So we have our first red layer here. And so this is another method of blending images together, creating composite images, is by reducing opacity. So when we reduce our opacity on our red here to 50, what we're seeing is 50% of these pixels in this red layer are presented to us, and 50% of these pixels are not presented to us, are functionally hidden, right? And so if we think about that, when we reduce the opacity on our image, so we're going to see the layer that exists beneath of it. And so when we combine these two images, like in this case, this red layer and this blue layer, what we're going to get is a combination of those colors, right? So when I reduce the opacity, what I'm seeing is the layer that exists beneath it. So now I have this red and blue combined make this purple. Does that make sense to everybody so far? In the sense that if I reduce this opacity, I'm seeing and if I do so, if I either increase or decrease the opacity, I'm seeing a variation on those colors. So if I have 80% of the pixels in this red turned on and 20% of those pixels turned off, I'm seeing a variation of this red that incorporates a bit of blue. Vice versa, if I have 20% of this red turned on and 80% of this red turned off, I'm seeing a blue that is sort of reminiscent of that red. Awesome. Okay, let's take a stop to answer a question. So we answered that one. Thank you, Dean. Does this make? Yeah, okay. So Trevor asked, so masks are black and white, but can also be gray to let some, but not all through. So that is correct. I typically, Trevor, don't interact with gray in regards to masks. I don't find it that useful. The time that you're going to see that utility come through is when you are using a brush with a sort of a high feathering. So even if I have, for example, a white brush, let's turn this opacity back on. Even if I have a white brush, right, or a black brush when I'm brushing on, you might see that this area, Trevor, do you see that area right here where it's sort of in between the blue and the red. Well, this is essentially a lowered opacity, and this is an effect of the feather that exists around the edge of my nib. And so when you brush on with black or when you brush on with white, high feathering is going to have a very similar effect to that of when we were interacting earlier with that gray layer. So I never use not black or white. When it comes to interacting with my mask, I always use either black or white. But you'll notice here that a similar effect to that when we use that yellow brush with in our mask, that you can see that sort of gradient appear here. So hopefully that answers your question. But yeah. So John said, I would expect that by inverting it 50%, there would be no difference, but I will see blue. Well, when we invert this, the way to invert an opacity change, right? Let's see if that's all erased for the most part. I'll just change it to set it to white there. So obviously when we reduce the opacity on this layer, we're seeing we have 50% red here. The mask in this case doesn't matter. This is just being applied to the layer. But if we had done the same thing, if we move this layer to the bottom and we take our blue layer here, and we reduce the opacity here, you can see that that same color comes through, right? Because the same interaction is having an effect here. The blue, the 50% blue, is being applied to the red, just as if the red with the 50% application is being applied to the blue. So those are the same, John. Okay, so that covers a couple things. Let's transition now to an image that isn't just a color. So we can sort of contextualize this in a way. Okay. So I'm going to, let's hide that for now. Actually, let's just save this file. I could use it again. And let's open up another image, and let's apply that sort of methodology to that of the sky replacement. Okay. So let's open up this image here. So we have our this is going to be our foreground layer. Okay. So we have our foreground, and let's apply a mask to our foreground layer. Actually, let's first, before we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to add another layer to our layer order, one that contains the sky. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little image here that says, or this little icon here that says add a file as a layer. And what we're going to do is let's just pick a sky layer. Let's pick this one right here. And as you can see, our sky is added to our layer order. Can everyone see our sky replacement above our foreground layer? So when we see that, what we're just going to do is we're just going to place this layer. So I'm just going to increase it so that it covers the whole width of the document here. You can zoom out so you can see that. And I'll just click commit. And so when that layer is committed, you can see that that layer exists above the foreground in our image layer here. What we can do is let's just rename this to new sky. And let's move the foreground above. Let's add a mask to our foreground layer. So I clicked on the little mask icon that you can see right down here, add layer mask, and that adds that little mask next to our layer. Now we can interact with our new sky layer. So if I was to take my brush tool, right, my brush here, and I begin the process of erasing it with a black foreground color, you can see that I can begin the process of adding that sky to my layer. Can everyone see that that sky is now coming through now that I've erased the top portion of my image? And what we can do is we can actually reference this exactly when it comes to our layer here. If we look at the layer, the mask and the layer here, we can see that the mask is referential of what we see in our image. So what is visible is that bottom portion, right? So the bottom portion is now presented to us. And the top portion, okay, is what has been sort of erased or concealed so that we see the new sky layer beneath it. Okay. Now, a point that one might make is, well, this is great, Adam, but how do I select the, around the mountain sort of thing, which is super relevant. So why don't we use a selection method that can hopefully, cover the whole sky here. I'm going to use something called a selection brush here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the sky. This just allows me to sort of ignore the background here. And we'll use this active selection to make a better representation of it, especially when it comes near the mountain here. So all I've done here is click on this little tool right here called the brush selection tool. And instead of interacting with the mask, I've selected the image. And the reason why is because I'm interacting with the image itself. So again, clicked on the brush selection tool, clicked on the image. And now with an active selection, what we can do is we can select our foreground, mask, go back to a black brush, and we can just brush on the remainder of that. And this is going to come through when we deactivate the selection. Just going to make sure to do that really quickly. And let's deselect and see how it comes through. Yeah, it needs cleanup for sure, but that gives you the idea. So that has created a little, yeah, fair enough. That's complicated. So we'll do it one more time just so everybody can see. So what we've done here is, what I'm trying to do is blend the foreground of the new sky. And the one way we can translate that is by making a selection. So if we use that brush selection, just like we did before, what we can do is we can go through and we can make little selection of our sky here. And then what we can do is we can turn this selection into a mask. So I can just make this little selection really quickly. Might turn the tolerance up here. Everybody can see that. And I'll just go around, collect the rest of the sky here. This red that you're seeing right now is a active selection. And selections can be turned into masks by when we click the mask button. No, this is not a destructive change because this is just a selection. Selections are temporary. So what we can do is you can see that it hasn't made any destructive changes because the foreground hasn't actually changed in our image here. The purpose of a selection is it holds information. So it holds this information, it's holding it. And then when we click on something like the mask tool, it's going to create a mask of this selection that we've made. So if I click on add layer mask here, what you're going to see is a mask can be created, right? So this mask is presented to us, and look at our foreground layer. You can see that the top portion, let's deselect so we can not see that yellow, or let's not see that red here. So if we're looking at our foreground layer here, you can see that we need to invert it, right? Because it's kind of the opposite effect of what we wanted. But if we selected our sky in our image and then we masked it, you can see that that whole sky in our image is masked. So it's actually represented in the mask to the right here. So the white part of our image is turned on and the black part of our image is turned off. And so if I take this little layer here and then just invert it, then you can see the background there, right? Then that's sort of our intended effect here. What I did there actually is kind of interesting because if we look at this original image, right, before I've made that selection, the reason why I've chosen the sky here to make a selection is because the sky is sort of unanimous in terms of color, and it's quite easy to select. I mean, I can go through the process of masking this image by hand, by adding a mask, going through and painstakingly, selecting, really zooming in and painstakingly selecting all of the little parts of my image that I want to hide and I want to showcase, right? Or I could just use a faster tool like that selection tool to sort of select what I need and then go through the process of masking. So I recommend when we were masking our image, if we want to omit something like in this image, like the sky, to just use a method like the brush selection tool, or maybe something like the pixel wand tool here. Let's showcase that. It's the magic wand tool here to sort of select your portion of the sky. And this is going to help you make an active selection. So when you go to add this to your mask, that's what's represented to you. There we go. You can see this selected portion is in red here. And the sort of the unselected portion is this portion that's down at the bottom here. One of the things I can do that's kind of neat is I can actually, once I have this active selection, like I said, I can just click on this like mask button here, and then it's masked to us. So I'm just going to mask, and then I'm just going to do a quick invert here. The thing you notice, or you might notice, is that there's this little section here that's lost right in this. It looks like it's selected out the cars, right? We can click on this little the mask here. And then what we can do is, because it's either modal, right? It's either black or white. We can actually just go through and clean up our image by painting on white, right? Which is going to showcase those once again. There's a couple of those parts where we can clean it up too. You can see it in here. So I can just go through and clean that up and add the color back in these areas. The reason why we'd use the magic wand tool, it's very unprecise, but it's very automated. So like when we go to make a selection, it's going to make that selection process easier for us. But there's going to be some things that it's going to select that we want in our image. And so that's what we're going to use the brush tool to go through the process of cleaning that up, right? And I can just go through and add these elements back into our image. Yeah, so let's see here. So Andrew has a really, really good question, and that relates exactly to so what we're talking about here. And that is, the most difficult thing is when you have forest trees on the foreground of the sky. And how do you handle that? Let's showcase that. Let's find a new image, one that has some forest, so we can work with that. I'm just going to discard this whole thing. And we can go to, let's go to another image with, see if I have an image with some, like a good landscape image with some clear sky, but lots of forest. Oh, that's not bad. Let's use this. We can talk about this image. So this kind of has that forest, like if we wanted to replace this top sky portion here, but you can see that there is still a bit of forest up top here. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So what we can do is we can apply the same rationale. We can use the selection tool to add a new mask to this image. So what we can do is we can use the mask tool. And so what we're going to do is maybe with a higher tolerance. So when we increase the tolerance, it's going to select more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way around the edge, because the edge is the only part that really matters in this initial pass, right? So I'm going to go through and I'm going to select that. And then I'll select the remainder, the top portion. And what I can do is I can just capture that area right here. I might go in with a smaller nib size here. And then we can clean up this, and then we'll answer Andrew's question, which is a really good one. Okay, so we haven't yet added a mask. We're just making the selection portion, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to go to select. We're going to go to refine. And what we can do with refine is we can actually select more than we intended along the boundaries of the area of our selection. So if we shift the edge outwards, you can see the selection will include less. If we shift the edge further inwards, which is what we want here, like that, then our selection will include a bit more. Let's see if we can find a nice middle ground here. Let's try this. So here's our active selection. And then what we can do is we can mask this. So you can see that when we mask this, a little bit of the tree portion has been added to the mask. And the reason why is because of when we refined that, we added a bit more extent there. So if we invert that, I still would like to clean that up a little bit more, but that does capture the little edges of the trees and does make a little softer transition there. So if we were to go through and if we were to add something like a new sky to our image here, like this one, for example, I'll just position it up here and then move this layer underneath. You can see it still needs a bit of cleanup, but it's refined it in some of those areas. And that is how you'd go through the process of taking one image and combining it with another image using that masking tool. So what we did there, just to reiterate, is we made a selection with the selection brush. And then we went in, we used something called refine when we had an active selection to sort of reduce the space or sort of remove more of that, that selection area right there. And that's taken through in the trees. And it sort of basically moved that selection back. So what we would see is less of like a halo, a little like halo that would appear around the edge of our selection. And like from here, what we do is we'd go through and we'd actually brush on, especially this part specifically is bothering me a little bit, but what we'd go through here is make sure our mask is selected and we just like erase any small area that, oops, with our brush tool like that. Martin, I'm not sure about your question. It's the same used for focus stacking multiple images. Focus stacking is more of like an automated process. So when you take multiple images that have the same like selection, and then you take multiple images with different sort of focal lengths, and then it does the sort of it sort of combines those elements together using one that like any area that has the highest degree of what would be the term for it, that has the best sharpness, and then combines the areas with the best sharpness in all those images. Noah asked, is there a way to see just the mask so it's easier to see the wand where the wand missed? Yes, you can see the mask overlay. Is this what you mean, Noah? Just to see where that's where you can see what you've highlighted or where the extent of the mask is. So all I did was I click on the mask itself. I go to mask overlay options and clicked on mask highlighted. And that shows what has been selected there. And if I right click on it and I select it again, let's see if I can turn that off. I think I just might go to, maybe if I just go to the opposite, mask exposed. Oh, I see. Let's see if I can turn this off. Let's see here. Now that I've done this, oh, you can just click on show overlay. Oh, I'm so sorry. I like changed the actual the option, but I didn't show you how to do it. So there's this little icon that appears in the mask properties, and that mask properties shows the overlay, as you can see. And you can change the methodology of that show by just clicking on the actual mask overlay options section there. But that shows you what you've selected in each. And it looks like I accidentally drew on right there. There we go. So if we show that again, there you go. Okay, you're welcome, Andrew. You're welcome, Noah. One of the things that we didn't have a chance to talk about too much, which I'd like to talk about now, is blending. So we focused on two methods by which to show multiple layers, right? So the one that we talked about, initially, obviously, is masking because it's the primary method by which we showcase these. Secondly, we talked a little bit about opacity. So when we lower opacity on layers, you can see the layer beneath it, right? Which blends those two layers together. And then the third thing that we haven't had a chance to talk about too much is blend modes. So blend modes is this little drop down that you see to the left of your image here. Let's open up our old image here and we'll showcase that a little bit. So we'll go to this layer example. And let's add a little layer to an image layer here. and we can talk about blend modes and sort of what they do. Blend modes do one of four things. They darken our image, they lighten our image, they apply a contrast, they compare, and some of them are also composites. So they create like a similar thing to when we create a composite image, but they actually create a composite color application as well. Let's open up our landscapes. Let's pick something nice, something with some detail. This is good. I'm gonna resize this and place it in the center of my image here. And let's pull this red above our layer here. Okay, so we have our landscape image. So we can paint on our layer, right? We can paint black over our red mask to showcase the layer beneath it. Method number one. Method number two is we can reduce the opacity of our red layer, right? Can everybody see how that's impacting our layer? That showcases the layer beneath it. The third method which we can do is we can apply blending. So it's blending is always by default set to normal, which means that 100% of the pixels in your image are being displayed normally. They have no effect on them. But if we go through and we apply something like screen adjustment, right? So screen is classically a lighten mode. So what it's going to do is it's going to apply this red to our image, and it's going to apply it to the areas of our image that are dark. So we can see that the lighten effect of this red is applied not necessarily as strongly to the areas of our image that are higher in brightness. What it is applied to the areas of our image that are actually lower in brightness. Can everybody see that? So these are really cool, and I would really highly suggest playing around with these different blend modes. There's a lot of them. So like I said, there's lighten, darken, contrast, comparative, and composite blend modes. So if I was to take this and turn it to something like multiply, right? Multiply is a darken blend mode. So it's going to take this red and it's going to do the inverse effect, right? This is going to be applied to areas of our image that have higher degrees of brightness and be applied less so to areas with lower degrees of brightness. Can everybody see the effect of that on our image? And actually, this is something we can showcase too with the color picker. So if we're looking to get a certain effect on our image in certain parts of our image, right, we can utilize this tool. Images that are blended are still subject to masking, meaning if I want my sky to be red in this image, and I want the foreground of my image to be natural color, right, I can still do that. I have a blended red layer above my layer that is now subject to masking. Can everybody see that? Can you see how my multiplied layer also has a blend mode applied to it? So it is masked and it is also multiplied. So this combination, right? This combination of tools together can get some really interesting effects. And so when we're creating composite images, all we're really doing is like adding layers together to create a final product. And the final product is up to you, what that's going to look like, how it's going to look like. But this is really cool. So if I was to set my mask white again, let's look at some of the other options. So Dodge, I believe, is a darken mode as well. Or no, it's a lighten mode. Sorry, it's a burn that's a darken mode. Yeah. So this, how is this different from screen? Well, we'd have to look at them to compare them. They look fairly similar on this image. Burn will probably look very similar to multiply on this image. These might have differing effects depending on the type of your image you're working with. Not all of these are applied the same to your image, right? They really correlate to the colors in your image, the brightness of your image. So if you apply a burn adjustment to one image, that burn adjustment might look very different than applied to a different image, right? It's all dependent on what you're actually applying them to. So overlay is a type of contrast mode, right? When we apply this, it's being applied universally to our image. So contrasts are modes that blend both darken and lighten the image at the same time. So that's sort of what overlay does. It's a type of contrast adjustment. Let's look at difference. Really cool effect, right? So what we're doing is we're applying we're applying this red layer to our areas of our image that have a darker brightness, or sorry, they're less bright. And then we're applying the opposite effect, right? So we're applying a opposite color to that of this red, which is the blue, to the areas of our image that are light. So kind of a neat effect as well. You can play around with these. Let's see here. Darken applies a very similar effect to that of multiply. Lighten, same as screen. Hard light in this case is going to have very little effect. Soft light. I've always loved soft light, as I think it's one of my probably preferred tools, because in this case, soft light kind of works very similar to that of a sepia tone, right? And so if we want to incorporate something like soft light in the background of our image, then we can use the brush tool, right? We can brush on the front of our image here. And the other thing we can do is we can apply opacity as well to this red layer. So when we apply opacity to this red layer, so there's a couple things going on in this layer right now. The layer is red, we know that. We know that the bottom portion of our red layer is masked out, meaning it's hidden, right? The top portion of our image that is being displayed is subject to a soft light blend mode. And then if I reduce the opacity as well, you can see that that red application up at the top of our image here has been reduced. Can everybody see that? Can everybody see that the red soft light adjustment has been lowered? So cool. Look at the effect that it has on our image. Like, it's very subtle, but it's so neat. It's very similar to a sepia adjustment, and it's bringing out some of those like really like ochre hues that exist in this image of Turkey here. So super cool. Like, this is combination of these three effects are so strong. So what you should be taking, what if I bring the blue to the middle? Blue to the middle. Do you mean the blue layer to the middle here? So if I bring the blue layer to the middle, because the blue layer is still subject to a normal, no blend mode, right? And it has no mask, then it is the thing that's being displayed in the layer order before anything else. So we have a red layer that exists above our blue layer with a soft light adjustment. Let's just turn it back to normal for a sec so you guys can see. So we have this normal adjustment red layer. We have the blue layer with no opacity adjustment, no blending, no masking. And then we have the landscape image beneath it. Meng, does this sort of answer your question in regards to what would happen if we move this blue layer up? Is there an outcome you were sort of looking for when we move this blue up? Because the other thing we can do is we can apply masks, we can apply opacity, we can apply blend modes to sort of still see that landscape image that we added to sort of illustrate the blend modes. But that's what happens when you bring the blue to the middle. Layer order matters. It is displayed beneath it. So, okay, can you add mask to the blue? Of course. So let's add a mask to the blue, and let's just, instead of let's just unhide, or basically sort of use that in add a black circle to the center of our image. And I'll add this, I'll apply the soft light again to the top layer so you can see it. So soft light of red being applied to the top portion of our image, we can still see that. So we can still see that right here. We have a blue that Meng wanted us to mask. So we've masked a circle into the center of this blue layer. And so we're seeing that, especially around the edges, right? And then we're seeing our base landscape image. So if we were to take this blue layer and we were then to apply a blend mode to it, so let's apply a color blend mode to it. So that's also going to change the relationship and the appearance of our image. So color takes blue, and color is also a type of, actually, I believe color is a lighten blend mode. But so we're going to take color and apply it, but that's going to look very different than if we were to apply a multiply effect with the blue to the edge of this. So are people understanding that the big takeaway for this whole workshop, right? The whole purpose of what we're talking about here is how do we combine images together? And the way that we combine images together are through three methods. Blending, right, which we're showcasing right now, using blend modes like multiply or screen that again are going to have a variety of different effects, but they all fall under the category of darken, lighten, contrast, comparative, and composite. To reduce the opacity of our layers. Reducing the opacity of our layers shows the layers beneath it, right? By the very process of you removing pixels from one layer, the pixels that appear in the layer beneath it are showcased to us. And then the one that we spent the most time describing, the one that is maybe the more complicated of the three, which is just the very concept of masking. How to mask an image, what parts of an image to mask. And I wish I had a bit more time to talk about mask selections, but it was kind of outside of the scope of this workshop. But it is something we've talked about in depth in our other workshops. So I would suggest to you or either participating in future workshops on the topic or going to our YouTube page and exploring the sort of ones like sky replacement workshop, where we talk specifically about selection methods, and masking. But the main takeaway, you can apply a blend, you can apply an opacity adjustment, and you can mask your image. And that is how you make composite images in ACDSee. Okay, let's answer some questions, but that covers the... Peter said, but that is destructive earlier. Peter, do you remember what you were referencing? You're most welcome, Darko. Thank you, Freddie. Oh, just a reminder too. I really want to remind everyone of this. And I'll say it again before I answer some more questions. Go to acdsee.com. Go to our community page right here, click on it, sign up to our photo film community. Just a reminder, our workshops are moving to this community space permanently, okay? Sign up to this. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. This is where our content is going to be in the future, okay? Please do this. We will not be sort of updating our workshop page anymore. Many of you have been like, hey, Adam, we still want you to send emails. Understood. I will communicate that to my boss and the people in the marketing department so they're aware of that. But it doesn't change the fact that there's going to be awesome content that is going to be appearing on our community site. So please go sign up for that, okay? They're still going to be over Zoom. It's just that the hub, the way you see them, is going to be through this community site, right? Sign up for it. It's important. That's where they're going to be. You're most welcome, Owen. Thank you so much. Happy New Year to everybody, by the way. Yeah. Owen said, fastest hour I've ever done on a workshop, really top shelf. Thank you. You're welcome. Meng said, even if it is destructive, you can just save it as, so save the originals. Yeah, you can always save as. I'm always saving my ACDSee files. I'm always saving these as I'm always saving my composition images as ACDSee files so I can edit them in the future. Thank you so much, Antonio. Randy, still going to be doing Zoom for sure. They're just over a community site. Oh, I should link that too. I'm a goof. I definitely need to link that for you guys. Let's see. Let's get that link for you. So this is it. That, and then my email is aprice@acdsystems.com. Check that out. How do you flatten the image after you're finished with it? So Harry, you can flatten your image by saving it as a flattened file type, so like a JPEG, for example, or you can merge your layers down within the actual edited file. I would recommend just saving it as a sort of a lossy file type like a JPEG or a PNG though, and maintaining to please hold on to your ACDSee files. Your ACDSee files are going to be the large ones, large files that contain all of the, contain all of this non-destructive information, right? So do both, save a flattened image and also save your working file. Gil, I wish I could read Hebrew, but take care. Thank you. Alex, thank you very much. Is there a web presentation on the database aspects of ACDSee? There's been lots of stuff covered on the database. So please check out our workshop page on our YouTube channel. Yes, all of the workshops will still be on YouTube. Those are not moving. And honestly, further to that, Margaret, we will be uploading our workshops that we do in our photo film community to the YouTube. So the YouTube will have all of that content on it, but please still sign up for our community page here. Okay. Here's our community. Here's my email, etc. Okay. Jack, I'm so glad. Okay, let's answer some questions here. Lynn, do I understand correctly that cell phone photos does not have layers? If you take a photo on your cell phone, and say, for example, that photo is a JPEG file, it's not going to have any layers. That doesn't mean you can't add layers to it. You can open up that image in edit mode and then start adding layers on it, Lynn. But your phone doesn't shoot photos in layers. There won't be multiple layers in it, if that makes sense. Hopefully that answers your question. But all images taken over your phone will just be a single layer. Yeah. Trevor, if I've already made a mask of the sky, then I want to view the image while refining the mask. Is there a best way to do this? Asking because part of the image under the black mask is invisible and just shown as erased. Yeah, this is a really good question. Thank you, Gil. Thank you, Mang. Take care. Harry says, how does the community page contact you about upcoming webinars? It's so the community page has a whole section right here just called events. So our film community, it has a whole bunch of different information on it. So there's just a bunch of different content that people share on this page. But if I actually click on the events tab, it just lists all future events, including this one that's going to be on January 13th here. So if you sign up to our Photo Film community, which is again free, this is going to be listed there, right? So including our ACDSee workshops. Again, people have been asking about me about whether or not you're going to get reminders. I don't know whether or not we're going to be sending emails out to people from in the community yet. I don't know this. I will get an answer for you by the time I do another workshop. Our next workshop I will still be doing one more workshop that'll be over our old method, the same way that you signed up to this. Just going forward, in the future, they're going to be on our photo film community. I do not know whether or not you're going to get an email yet. I will find out, I promise. If you're curious and need an answer, please email me. I will get back to you with an answer probably next week. Hopefully that helps. Thanks. Okay, so where were we? What were we talking about? Trevor, great question. Close that. Masking. So we had a image of the landscape here. Trevor wants to know if when you already have a mask, how do you get that selection back? Let's make a quick selection of our sky. We won't refine it. Blah, 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 blah. So Trevor wants to know how we can get that refine section back up on his image. Okay. So here's our selected landscape. Trevor, you can see that. How do you get your selection back? So you can right-click your image, add mask to selection. Okay. Go to select, refine. And this might do what we're looking for. So if we refine this and we lower it and click done, it's going to be added to the selection. And then what we can do is we can create a new mask. Trevor, does that answer your question? We've just created a new mask by refining it there. This needs work, and it looks like I've lost a bit of the edge there, but I can clean that up using the tool, the pen tool, or the brush tool rather, sorry. But I think that does what you wanted it to do, which is to take an already existing mask and then add a selection. Can you create a new mask from the old one? I think that's what we did, didn't? Yeah, so you can, take your click on your actual mask, add your mask to selection. It's going to add it to your selection. So you have this red layer that appears now, right? And you can either invert it or, whatever. And then from there, you can refine. As long as you have an active selection, Trevor, you can make a refinement. Okay. So if you can get this red back in some way, this active selection back, pardon me, then you'll be able to refine it. That's the only prerequisite that refine needs. You'll notice that if I deselect and I try to go to refine, then refine is grayed out. But as soon as I make a selection in any way, then refine comes back. And that gives me the ability. So what I did earlier was I right-clicked my image and I added my mask to selection because that selection is what gives me the refine tool. Awesome. Great question. That's a complicated one, but great question. Kim asked, how do you correct the thin white outline on the tops of the mountains? We talked about that. We used the refine tool. Also making better selections is a good way to do that. Sometimes you can utilize a lower tolerance, and lower tolerance is going to be a little bit more gentle around the edges of things. Ultimately, selections take time, Kim. Andrew asked, is there a suitable way to change the color of a river when you want it a little bit more blue than it is, and it is usually brown? Great question. Let's go find a river. I'm going to go into my landscape folder. This has some water. Talk about this. So Andrew's question is a really good one. Here's my image, and I want to change this watercolor. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a vibrance adjustment. Okay. That vibrance adjustment appears above it, Andrew, in the layer order. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the hue. So you wanted it to be a bit more blue. So I can either increase the saturation or I can adjust the hue. So if the water, you know what, let's just see if I can turn it to be a bit more brown. I'll do the opposite of what you wanted. So I can show you what I mean. So I have I've changed this water to be a bit more of a brown color. You could do the inverse of this. Once I have the vibrance that I like, I'm going to right click on I'm going to set it to black. This turns it off. This turns that adjustment off right there. And then all I need to do is use the brush tool with a mask of white, and I'll just turn it on in the area that I want to see that brown effect. Does that make sense, Andrew? If that does, please let me know. So that was just a quick vibrancy adjustment to the area of my pool there. Please let me know if that makes sense. Okay, Peter asked, I presume you can change the opacity and blend modes. Yes. We covered that. Can you apply black and white? So that was probably a question from earlier. Maybe get back to me in regards to what you were talking about, Eric. But yeah. Dean asked, if the red layer was a different color, what happens? So he was mentioning, or sort of referencing rather, a question from earlier in regards to this one. So if the red layer in our example here was a different color, so if we take a fill bucket tool and we fill our red layer in, let's fill it with yellow. So I have my red layer right here. I've clicked my fill tool and I've clicked my foreground. And to be clear, I'm not filling the mask this time. I'm filling the layer, the image itself, because I want this red to change color, not to be displayed differently. So I'd fill it with yellow, and there you have it. Dean, hopefully that answers your question. that is when we change our red to a different color. You're most welcome. Okay, awesome. It's been addressed. Ron asked, where do we find a reference to see which blend modes fall into which categories, i.e. dark and lighten? Let's see if I can find one for you. Help contents. Help contents. And if I look up blending, using blend modes and opacity, there you go. This one. Ron, to get to this help mode, all I did was help and go to help contents. It opens up a ACDSee Photo Studio Ultimate help board. I looked up blending and I clicked on the first listing here and it shows all of these different application information for these blends. Ron, does this answer your question? If so, I'll link this so you can see it. There you go. That is for you, my friend. And that goes into all the different details on that. Okay, we've gone an hour and a half. That's pretty long. I'd like to close up soon. Does anyone have any other questions? I guess what I'd like to reiterate one more time, and this is very important, is please sign up to our new community page. You can get to the community page by clicking the community button on our website. So our website's right here. The community is free. It doesn't cost anything to sign up to. That is where our workshops are going to be. I understand that many people still want us to send emails. I will communicate this with our team so that you still have access to that. I don't know the status of that yet. I will get more information, okay? If you're curious and you need more information from me, please email me. My email is aprice@acdsystems.com. I can answer any questions there. And what else is there to say? Yeah, I guess just sign up, or also maybe just subscribe to our YouTube page and you'll get an update there. As for this workshop, I'm hoping to have this edited and uploaded to our YouTube tomorrow. So just check out our YouTube page tomorrow and it should be up there. And I guess that's really all there's to say. I'm probably just going to maybe mute my mic and enjoy the rest of my coffee. I'll stick around for a bit if any questions pop up. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for participating in this workshop on blending, layers, and masking.